Well, here we go with Chapter 4. In the first 3 chapters, we looked at several theories and thoughts related to learning and teaching language. Over the next 5 chapters, we are going to look at more practical ideas related to teaching the 4 skills of reading, writing, speaking, and listening, as well as academic English, which will be especially interesting for you if you are looking at teaching more advanced learners. As we go through the next 5 chapters, I want you to remember that when we teach language, we don't really focus on just one skill. We are always mixing them and teaching 2 or 3 of those skills at the same time. So although we will be talking about teaching individual skills, we should also be thinking how they will be integrated in the classroom. This week, we are going to have a look at how we can help students improve their listening skills. Here is our basic schedule for this week. Over the next few chapters, we'll be following a similar pattern, looking at a few issues related to the teaching of that skill, sharing ideas about activities and tasks we can use to teach that skill, and how we can assess whether our students have achieved the goals related to that skill that we had set. So let's have a closer look at listening. As I guess you would be expecting by now, we will start with a discussion. As language teachers, having experience learning a second or foreign language is invaluable. It allows you to pass on learning strategies to your students. So my first question for you this week is about your strategies for listening. What do you do in your regular English studies to improve your listening ability? Write down a few ideas and be prepared to share them in class. We start off with some essential concepts you need to be aware of when it comes to helping students develop their listening ability. There is a good list on page 86 that you need to remember. These all affect the amount of students' listening comprehension, so you need to understand them all. You may have heard of a few of these in our previous classes. For example, when we talk about background knowledge, also known as schema, or the plural schemata, we note that even if the speaker is using very simple English, unless the listener knows something about that topic, it will be very difficult for him or her to comprehend what is being said. With the final one, intonation, the use of rising and falling tone of voice can change the meaning of a sentence, depending on whether the speaker is angry, happy, being sarcastic, or whatever. This is one reason why misunderstandings can occur in text messages and emails. The reader can sometimes not guess the correct intonation of the writer and thus misinterpret the meaning. Make sure you are aware of and have a strong understanding of the 8 concepts on page 86, so you'll be able to use them when working on the listening skills of your students. So listening is an essential skill. You don't need me to tell you that. I mean, how can you participate in successful communication if you can't comprehend what the other person is saying? In the past, many people considered listening to be a passive skill, just like reading. However, it is well accepted now that this is not true. Listeners must be very active, taking in not only the words, but non-verbal messages, such as gestures, facial expressions, tone of voice, and so on. These all help make understanding the message easier, and is a reason why communicating on the telephone is so difficult. Despite listening being so difficult, it is often neglected in EFL classes. There are a few reasons for this. Our textbook discusses 2. First, we see that listening practice in classrooms is not authentic. The pace is difficult. Some teachers speak too quickly, maybe like me in our regular classes, and some teachers speak too slowly. Also, listening practice is often very clear. So when learners are outside the classroom communicating in English, they often become distressed because of all of the surrounding noise and interruptions that occur. Furthermore, there are problems when speakers drop words or parts of words, or even change the topic within a sentence. Another difficulty is that in the classroom, students have chances to recover if they miss something. In authentic speech, students really need to catch what was said the first time. Otherwise, it can affect communication for the worse. All these issues related to the authenticity of listening materials affect whether we are really preparing our students for the real world. Make sure you are aware of them when you are preparing listening tasks for your students. The second difficulty with teaching listening is unrealistic expectations. Many students believe that they have to understand every single word the other person said. This is not true. In listening, and reading for that matter, we do need to use bottom-up processing, which is listening to each word, but also use top-down processing, which is using our background knowledge to help us understand the overall message. Our textbook suggests that older learners tend to focus on bottom-up processing, whereas younger learners are happy with a top-down approach. In fact, humans use both of these processes simultaneously when listening to our first language, so we need to learn to use both processes when working on our listening skills in the second language. Here, I would like to hear your ideas. What activities can you think of that would develop the bottom-up, the top-down, and a combination of these two processes? Get your thinking caps on and share what ideas you have in class. As with many aspects of language teaching, or any teaching in fact, there is a process we should go through. We cannot expect our students to suddenly go from not being able to comprehend what someone has said to being able to completely understand spontaneous speech. Therefore, it is best for us to think about the process in which we will help our students improve their listening skills. First, students need to recognize the sounds of the target language. We can do this through playing English songs as background music. We don't need our students to understand anything at this stage. Next, within the blur of language they are hearing, encourage students to recognize a few words. Meaning is not necessarily important at this stage either, but through a routine of regularly using songs, rhymes, and stories, learners will start to recognize similar sounds. Third, students start to recognize more sounds, words, phrases, and even sentences. Even though students may still not completely understand what is being said, they do start to develop a feeling of, "I've heard this somewhere before." Using total physical response, which we talked about in Chapter 3, is a great activity to use here. After this, we see listening for gist. Although students may not understand many details, they can still get the general meaning. Using children's books is a great way to build listening at this stage. Finally, we have true listening, where students are able to get the meaning and listen in chunks rather than just individual words. Our textbook gives us suggestions of providing context for listening materials and following up with questions related to the content. We always need to think carefully about the level of material we are using. As we have talked about in the past, Stephen Krashen suggests I+1 as an appropriate level. Keep it just a little challenging for students to achieve the optimal progress. I think the kangaroo joke is getting a bit old. I might have to think of something different. When we develop activities to use in class, we need to follow a few rules or guidelines. On pages 95 to 97, you'll find 12 pieces of advice to help you create effective listening activities. We need to make sure expectations are realistic, both those of teachers and students. We need to make sure we don't speak too quickly and help our students feel relaxed. We should make sure students are aware of the context to which they are listening and keep the content as authentic as possible. We need to be aware of what students are interested in and consider cultural references that may cause some problems. We may sometimes be required to use simpler and slower speech and perhaps give students opportunities to listen again. Teaching listening strategies is vital and a reason why I believe it is better for non-native speakers to teach listening skills than native speakers of English. Like the use of closed captions in the video you are watching now, we can take advantage of technology to help our students improve their listening skills, as well as discuss successes and failures that they have had with listening outside of the classroom. Considering these guidelines will help you help your students more as they strive to be better listeners. On pages 97 to 103, there are many activities that were created to help students develop their listening abilities. I would like you to develop one as well. Imagine you are teaching an English lesson that is focused on the present continuous. You are conducting a class about ing. Prepare an activity, including script and materials if necessary, and bring it to class. In class, I would like you to actually do the activity in your group. And finally, we come to how to assess listening. In this section, we see two terms, assessment and test. I would like to quickly mention that assessment and test are slightly different. Assessment is what you would do regularly, either in or out of class. If you notice a student has understood what you said, you have assessed the student. Tests, on the other hand, are more formal, and usually students will be sitting down and writing answers on a piece of paper. Conducting a test is one way of assessing a student's ability. So assessing listening ability is difficult. We cannot see directly what a student has understood and has not understood. In listening tests, we need to provide the context and opportunities for students to listen again if they need to. We should be using inference questions rather than recall questions. An inference question requires students to think beyond just the words they heard, whereas a recall question simply requires students to remember a word or number they heard. When you are assessing your students, observing and looking for signs that they have understood or not understood is vital. By increasing the number of casual conversations you have with students using the target language, you will have more opportunities to do this. Our textbook also suggests that dictation is a good way to check listening comprehension. Personally, I prefer Dictogloss. I talked briefly about Dictogloss tasks before, and I believe that they are very effective. If we have time, let's try one in class. One thing that has appeared in this chapter a few times that has kind of bugged me is the idea about re-listening. What do you think? In many listening tests, students are given the text twice. Sometimes they are given the text only once, which I feel is a little more authentic. As our final discussion for this week, please tell us about your thoughts on this topic. Do you think listening tests should provide the text just once? Or do you feel more than once is better? I look forward to hearing your opinions. So that's it for Chapter 4. As you can see, there are quite a few things we need to consider when it comes to teaching listening. There is no doubt it is not an easy skill to teach, but it is not mission impossible. Make sure you prepare for class by looking through the chapter again, watch this video once more, highlight what you feel are the most important spots, and get a few ideas about teaching activities to share in class. Bye bye.